3 years after my best friend died. I found a notebook she never expected me to read. And by the time I got to the last page, I realized something that honestly still makes me feel sick when I say it out loud. She had been studying me for years. Not just loving me. Studying me. I know how that sounds. I do. It sounds dramatic or paranoid or like grief made me spiral into some conspiracy version of our friendship. I've told myself all of those things already. But then I remember the entries. The specific wording. The things she predicted about me that turned out to be exactly right. And suddenly it doesn't feel dramatic anymore. It just feels true. I found the notebook sitting on the floor of a storage unit on a rainy Saturday in October. My jeans were covered in dust. My husband was outside loading boxes into the car. And I was holding this black spiral notebook with her handwriting on the front. Journals. Private. I actually put it back the first time. That's the part one keep thinking about. I taped the box shut. Carried it halfway toward the donation pile. And then I stopped walking. I don't know why. Seriously, I don't. But I remember this horrible feeling in my stomach, like some part of me already knew there was something in that notebook waiting for me. Something I'd been circling around for years without fully admitting it to myself. So I went back. Opened the box. Opened the notebook. And in less than an hour, the last 11 years of my life rearranged themselves completely. Okay. Sorry. I know that's intense right out of the gate, but if I ease into this, I'll start protecting her again. And I'm trying really hard not to do that anymore. Her name was Diane. I thought about changing it. I really did. But honestly, I spent enough years protecting Diane while she was alive. I can't keep doing it now that she's gone too. Diane was my best friend for 11 years. 11. We met because our daughters were in the same kindergarten class. Just one of those suburban mom friendships that happens accidentally. Pickup lines. Birthday parties. School events. Coffee after drop-off. And she was magnetic. That's the word. Not beautiful in some intimidating movie star way. It was more emotional than that. Diane had this ability to make you feel completely seen within 5 minutes of talking to her. Like you mattered immediately. She remembered tiny details. Tiny things nobody else remembered. My coffee order. The anniversary of my dad's death. The fact that I hated thunderstorms because of a car accident when I was 19. Stuff I barely remembered telling her myself. And when my marriage started getting rough a few years later, she became the person I told everything to. Everything. God. There are conversations I wish I could pull back out of the air and swallow whole. I told her things I hadn't told my sister. Things I definitely hadn't told my husband. Fights. Fears. Intimate details. Moments where I wondered if my marriage was slowly dying and we were both too exhausted to admit it. And Diane listened so carefully. She had this way of leaning forward slightly when you talked. Like your words mattered more than anything else happening around her. Nobody had listened to me that closely in years. So I trusted her completely. That's the embarrassing part now. Not that I trusted her. That I trusted her so completely I stopped questioning anything. The first moment that matters happened maybe 2 years into our friendship. Her husband Garrett called me one afternoon. And that was unusual already because Garrett and I weren't close. Friendly, yes. But not phone call close. His voice sounded tense. Careful. Like he'd rehearsed the conversation before dialing. He asked, "Has Diane seemed okay to you lately?" I remember laughing softly because I assumed they were fighting. I said, "Yeah, why?" And there was this long silence. Then he said, very quietly, "She keeps forgetting conversations. Appointments. Things we already talked about. I'm starting to get worried." I hadn't noticed anything strange. At least, I didn't think I had. So I told him she seemed fine to me. And after we hung up, I moved on with my day almost immediately. That's the part that haunts me now. how fast I let it go. Because looking back, I think that phone call was the first time reality tried to warn me. And I didn't realize it then. But I had already become part of a story I didn't fully understand. Looking back now, I think Diane understood people faster than most of us do. Not intellectually, emotionally. She could walk into a room and figure out who needed reassurance, who needed attention, who needed to feel special. And once she figured that out, she became exactly that person for them. At the time, I thought that made her compassionate. Now, I honestly don't know what to call it. Because the thing about Diane was, she never made you feel judged. Ever. You could tell her the ugliest, most embarrassing parts of yourself and somehow leave the conversation feeling lighter instead of ashamed. That's rare. Especially for women in their 30s and 40s who are quietly falling apart behind perfectly normal-looking lives. And I was quietly falling apart. My husband and I were struggling around year 3 or 4 of our friendship. Not dramatically. Honestly, I almost wish it had been dramatic because then maybe I would have paid attention sooner. This was slower than that. Colder. It was like one day we stopped being curious about each other. Conversations became schedules, bills, grocery lists, school pickups. We'd sit on the same couch at night staring at different screens without speaking for an hour. And somehow that felt worse than fighting. At least fighting means there's still emotion left. I remember lying awake beside him sometimes thinking, if I disappeared emotionally, would he even notice right away? That thought scared me. So when Diane listened to me, really listened, it felt intoxicating. I told her everything. No. Actually, that's not even fully accurate. I told her things I should have protected more carefully. That's the truth. I told her about money fights. About intimacy problems. About nights I sat in my car after work because I didn't feel ready to go inside my own house yet. I told her about the week I secretly looked at apartment rentals online just to imagine what leaving might feel like. And every single time, she made me feel understood. Never shocked. Never uncomfortable. Just understood. God. I miss that feeling sometimes. That's the confusing part. Even after everything, I still miss parts of her. Around year 5, she started talking about problems with Garrett. At first it was subtle. Little comments. He's been weird lately. Or, he gets upset when I go out with friends. Then eventually bigger things. He checks my phone. He twists conversations around. He acts like I can't remember things correctly. That line matters more than I realized at the time. Actually, no, that's not true. Part of me remembers feeling unsettled even then. Just slightly. Because it connected to that phone call Garrett made years earlier asking if she seemed forgetful. But Diane always explained things in ways that made your sympathy activate before your skepticism could. That was her real talent. She'd cry at exactly the moments that shut your questions down. Not fake crying either. Real tears. That's what made it so confusing. She felt sincere because I think emotionally, in those moments, she probably was sincere. I know that sounds contradictory. Welcome to my entire emotional reality for the last 18 months. There was one night she came over after a fight with Garrett and sat at my kitchen table crying into a paper towel while I made tea. And I remember her saying, "I feel like he's constantly trying to catch me doing something wrong." That sentence hit me hard because I'd grown up around criticism. My father was loving, but very critical, and something about Diane's pain activated this protective instinct in me immediately. I took her side before I even fully understood the situation. That's important. Because once you emotionally choose a side in someone's marriage, objectivity becomes almost impossible after that. And Diane reinforced that closeness constantly. She'd say things like, "You're the only person who really sees what's happening." Or, "I don't know what I'd do without you." And every time she said things like that, I felt more protective of her. More necessary. Looking back now, I think she understood exactly how much I needed to feel needed. That's a hard sentence to admit out loud. But I think it's true. There was this dinner around year 7 that I replay constantly now. Her daughter's birthday dinner. Nothing fancy. Pizza. Wine. Kids yelling over each other. Everything seemed normal. Then Garrett mentioned a vacation they'd taken. Just some random story about a hotel reservation. And Diane corrected him immediately. No, that's not what happened. Garrett looked confused. Genuinely confused. Not angry. Not controlling. Confused. And he said very quietly, Diane, that is what happened. The table went awkwardly silent for maybe 2 seconds. Then she laughed it off instantly. Oh my God, whatever, who cares, she said. Conversation moved on. But I couldn't stop looking at Garrett's face afterward. Because there was something there I didn't understand at the time. Fear maybe. Not fear of her. Fear for her. And I noticed it. I absolutely noticed it. But instead of sitting with that discomfort, I pushed it away. Filed it under complicated marriage dynamics, and kept moving. Again. I kept moving. That's the pattern I see now. Every time reality brushed against me, I found a way to soften it before it could fully land. Because admitting something was wrong with Diane would have meant admitting I might not actually understand the person I trusted most. And honestly, I don't think I was ready for that yet. But the thing that happened in year 8. The thing Garrett found on her computer. That's when the cracks stopped being easy to ignore. Year 8 is where everything started feeling heavier. At the time I couldn't explain why. I just remember this constant low-level anxiety around Diane that I kept trying to talk myself out of. Like my instincts were knocking quietly somewhere in the background, and I kept turning the volume down. My husband and I took a weekend trip that spring trying to reconnect. Just 2 nights away. No kids. No distractions. One of those, maybe we can still fix this before it turns into permanent distance, kind of trips. And honestly, it helped a little. We laughed more that weekend than we had in months. Sat across from each other at dinner actually talking instead of scrolling on our phones. There was this moment in the hotel room where we stayed up until 2 in the morning talking about our 20s and old apartments and dumb memories we'd forgotten. I remember feeling hopeful driving home. Like maybe we weren't too far gone yet. And then Diane called. The second we got back. I could hear panic in her voice immediately. Not sadness. Not heartbreak. Panic. There's a difference, and once you hear it, you can't unhear it. She said Garrett had gone through her laptop while she was out. He violated my privacy, she kept saying over and over. He had no right. I remember standing in my kitchen with my suitcase still half unpacked while she cried into the phone. And I asked the obvious question. What did he find? There was this pause. Tiny. But now when I replay it in my head, it feels enormous. Then she said, that's not the point. And somehow, I let that answer slide. Actually no. That's not fully true. I didn't let it slide because I believed her answer made sense. I let it slide because she sounded emotionally overwhelmed and I wanted to comfort her more than I wanted clarity. That's the truth. And Diane was very, very good at making emotional urgency replace accountability. A few days later she came over while my husband was at work. She sat at my kitchen table for almost 4 hours talking in circles. That's the only way I can describe it now. Circles. She'd start explaining what happened with Garrett, then drift into stories about feeling trapped in the marriage, then suddenly start crying about something unrelated, then redirect the conversation somewhere else before I could fully pin anything down. At one point I finally asked, Diane, does he think you're seeing someone? And she froze. Just for a second. But I saw it. Then she laughed. Too fast. Oh my God, no. He's paranoid. I remember this weird cold feeling moving through my stomach after she said it. Tiny. Quick. But real. Because suddenly I realized I couldn't actually tell whether she was lying or not. That realization lasted maybe 3 seconds before I pushed it away. 3 seconds. I told myself divorce stress makes people suspicious. I told myself controlling men accuse women of cheating all the time. I told myself I was overthinking things. I became a machine for explaining away discomfort. And honestly, I think part of me already understood that if Diane was lying about something this big, then suddenly I had to reevaluate our entire friendship. I wasn't emotionally prepared for that. So I stayed loyal instead. That summer she told me she was leaving Garrett. We were sitting in my car outside her daughter's soccer practice when she said it. Very calm. Almost detached. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered. And I grabbed her hand immediately. Without hesitation. God. I can still remember feeling proud of myself for supporting her so fully. That's what hurts now. I helped her apartment hunt. Compared school districts with her. Let her stay in our guest room for a week while lawyers figured things out. My house became this emotional headquarters for her separation. And she praised me constantly during that time. "You're my anchor." That was her favorite word for me. Anchor. She said it so often that eventually it became part of how I saw myself in her life. The stable one. The safe one. The loyal one. I didn't realize then how addictive it can feel to be emotionally indispensable to someone. Especially if you're already lonely in your own marriage. About 4 months after she moved out, she told me there was someone else. A guy from work. I remember exactly where we were when she said it because suddenly everything around me felt strangely sharp afterward. The coffee shop noise. The espresso machine steaming milk. Somebody laughing too loudly behind us. I asked, "How long has this been going on?" And she looked down at her cup before saying, "A few months." That phrase. God. Even now hearing it in my head makes me tense up. Because immediately my brain started doing math. Not consciously at first. Just instinctively. A few months meant overlap. Maybe not huge overlap, but enough that suddenly the timeline stopped feeling clean. And I almost questioned her. I almost did. But then she started crying again. Saying how guilty she felt. How confused she'd been. How unhappy she'd become with Garrett long before the separation. And once again, her emotions redirected the conversation before accountability could fully enter it. That happened constantly. I just didn't see the pattern yet. Then things moved fast. Too fast. The divorce finalized. The new boyfriend suddenly everywhere. Weekend trips. Family outings. Social media photos where Diane looked happier than I'd seen her in years. And I wanted to believe it. I really did. Because if she was happy now, then maybe all the pain and chaos had at least led somewhere meaningful. But there were moments. Little moments. Where the story still didn't sit right in my chest. Like one night at dinner when my husband casually asked how she and the new guy met. And Diane answered immediately. Too smoothly. Like she'd rehearsed it before. Then when my husband asked a harmless follow-up question, she snapped at him slightly. Just enough to shut the conversation down. The table got quiet. And later that night my husband said, "Something about that whole situation feels weird." I got defensive immediately. Aggressively defensive. And looking back now, I think that reaction said more than I understood at the time. Because deep down, I was already afraid there might be something real underneath all those cracks. But what I didn't know yet was that Garrett had already tried to warn me twice. The first time Garrett reached out after the divorce, I almost didn't open the message. Not because I disliked him. But because by then, in my head, everything had a kind of invisible boundary around it. Diane was my person. He was the ex-husband. And even though I never said it out loud, I had already sorted the world into those categories without realizing it. So when I finally opened his message, I didn't know what I was expecting. Anger, maybe. Bitterness. Some version of, "You chose her over me." But it wasn't that. He thanked me. That was the first thing. He said he appreciated how I had helped during the separation with the kids, and that he knew Diane leaned on me heavily during that time. I remember reading that sentence twice because it didn't match the version of him I had built in my head. He didn't sound like someone trying to attack me. He sounded tired, worn down in a way that felt deeper than just divorce. And then at the end of the message, he wrote something that stuck in my chest for days. He said, "I hope one day you understand what was really going on." I stared at that line longer than I want to admit, because it didn't feel like a threat. It felt like unfinished truth. But I didn't respond. Not because I didn't care, but because I didn't know what I was supposed to say to something like that without opening a door I wasn't ready to walk through. So I closed the message. And I left it there. The second time he reached out, he almost told me everything. And I think about this moment more than I probably should. It was late. I was already in bed. Phone in my hand, doing that mindless scrolling thing where you're half asleep but still online. And his name popped up again. This time the message was longer. He wrote, "There are things I found after the divorce that I think you should know. Things that change a lot of what happened." My heart actually dropped. Physically. I remember sitting up in bed immediately, fully awake now, reading it again and again. Because the tone was different this time. More urgent. Less filtered. I typed out a response. Deleted it. Typed again. Deleted again. And before I could decide what to say, another message came through. And this is the one that still haunts me. Actually, never mind. I shouldn't put this on you. That's it. No explanation. No follow-up. Just gone. And I let it end there. I told myself it was better not to get involved in a complicated ex-husband situation. I told myself I didn't need to know every detail of their marriage to be a good friend. But the truth is I was scared. Because something in me already knew that whatever he was about to say would force me to reassemble the entire story of Diane. And I wasn't ready for that level of collapse yet. So I chose ignorance without admitting I was choosing it. That's what I did. Diane remarried 18 months after the divorce. 18 months. I remember thinking at the time that it felt fast, but I told myself people heal differently. People move on in their own time. Who was I to judge? At the wedding she looked radiant. That's the word everyone used. Radiant. And she did look happy. Genuinely happy. She hugged me tightly before the ceremony and said, "I finally feel like I can breathe again." And I believed her. I really did. Because I wanted the story to be simple. Garrett was the difficult chapter. Diane was the survivor. And I was the friend who stayed through it all. Everyone had their role. And roles are comforting because they stop you from asking questions. But even then, small things started bothering me. Tiny inconsistencies that I ignored at the time but now feel louder in hindsight. Like how carefully she told the story of meeting her new husband. It wasn't spontaneous. It was structured. Almost rehearsed. And when my husband asked a small follow-up question about timing, she got slightly sharp with him. Not rude exactly. Just enough to close the conversation. And later that night my husband said quietly, "Something about that feels off." And I snapped at him. Harder than I should have. I said she'd just been through a divorce and deserved happiness without being analyzed. And I remember the look on his face after I said that. Not anger. Not argument. Just surprise. Like he was realizing I was more emotionally invested in defending her than I realized. And honestly, he wasn't wrong. Because by that point, I think I had already tied my identity to being her safe place. And questioning her would have meant questioning my own role in everything too. So I didn't. Not yet. But Garrett had tried to tell me something twice already. And I had ignored both times. And the third time I would finally understand why that mattered. Would come much later than I ever expected. The first message from Garrett after that still feels strange to think about. Because I remember how normal it looked at first. Just a name on my phone. No warning. No build-up. Nothing that would suggest my entire understanding of the past decade was about to start shifting. I opened it while I was unloading groceries. Half distracted. Still thinking about dinner. Still thinking about school pickup times. And then I read it. And I stopped moving completely. He didn't attack me. That's what confused me the most. He didn't insult Diane. He didn't accuse me of anything. He just thanked me. He said he appreciated how I had been there for the kids during the separation. That he knew Diane leaned on me heavily during everything. And I remember standing in my kitchen holding a bag of apples and just rereading that line over and over. Because it didn't match the version of him I had built. In my mind, he was supposed to be the controlling husband she escaped from. But his tone wasn't controlling. It was exhausted. Like someone who had spent years trying to explain something no one wanted to hear. Then at the end of the message, he wrote something that stayed in my head for days. I hope one day you understand what really happened. Not dramatic. Not threatening. Just final in a way I couldn't decode yet. Like he was setting something down that he was tired of carrying alone. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't think about it. But because I couldn't figure out what response wouldn't open a door I wasn't prepared to walk through. So I closed it. And tried to forget it. But I didn't forget it. Not even a little. The second message came months later. Late at night. One of those quiet house moments where everything is dark except your phone screen and your thoughts are louder than they should be. And when I saw his name again, my stomach dropped before I even opened it. This time, the message was different. Longer. He wrote, "There are things I found after the divorce that change a lot of what you think happened." That sentence alone made my chest tighten. Because it didn't sound like opinion. It sounded like evidence. My brain immediately started racing. I remember sitting up in bed, heart pounding, reading it again and again like repetition would make it less real. And I started typing. Then stopped. Then deleted it. Then typed again. Because suddenly every possible response felt wrong. And before I could decide, another message came through. And this is the one I still think about more than I should. Actually, don't worry about it. I shouldn't put this on you. And that was it. Just gone. No explanation. No follow-up. No chance to ask. And I let it end there. I told myself it was better that way. That I didn't need to get pulled into their past. That I already knew enough. But I didn't know enough. Not even close. I just didn't want to admit that. Because admitting that meant admitting something else too. That I might have been wrong about the entire shape of a person I trusted more than almost anyone in my life. And I wasn't ready for that kind of collapse. So I stayed where it was safer. In the version of the story I already understood. Diane remarried about 18 months after the divorce. It felt fast to me at the time, but I told myself I wasn't inside her experience. People rebuild differently. People cope differently. That's what I said to myself to make it make sense. At the wedding, she looked lighter. That's the word I remember most clearly. Lighter. Like something heavy had been removed from her life and she finally had space to breathe again. She hugged me before the ceremony and whispered, "I feel like myself again." And I believed her. Because I wanted to believe her. Because believing her kept everything simple. Garrett was the difficult past. Diane was the survivor. And I was the loyal friend who stood beside her through it all. That structure made sense. That structure was comfortable. And anything that didn't fit it, I pushed aside. Even when it didn't fully sit right. Even when small inconsistencies started stacking up. Like how carefully she told the story of meeting her new husband. It wasn't casual. It was rehearsed in a way I didn't recognize at the time. And when my husband asked a harmless question about timing, she shut it down quickly. Not aggressively. Just firmly enough that the topic ended immediately. Later that night, my husband said quietly, "Something about that feels off." And I reacted too strongly. Immediately. Like a reflex. I told him she had been through enough and didn't deserve to be questioned. And the second I said it, I saw something flicker across his face. Not anger. Just realization. Like he was noticing something about me I hadn't fully admitted to myself yet. Because by that point, I think I had already become emotionally invested in protecting her version of reality. Even more than I was interested in understanding it. And that's the part one didn't see yet. That protecting someone too strongly can sometimes mean avoiding the truth. And the truth was already trying to reach me. Through Garrett. Through small cracks. Through moments I kept explaining away. But I still wasn't ready to listen. Not yet. And the next time everything shifted, I wouldn't be able to ignore it anymore. The next shift didn't come like a revelation. It came like something quiet finally breaking under pressure. I found out about Diane's cancer on a Tuesday morning. Pancreatic cancer. And I remember because the doctor used that tone people use when they're trying to be gentle but also honest at the same time. The kind of tone that tells you everything before the words even fully land. Stage 4. That part still doesn't feel real when I say it out loud. I sat in the hospital room with her after she told me, and she looked different. Not just sick. Smaller. Like the version of her I knew had been slowly fading before I even realized it was happening. And she reached for my hand and said very quietly, "I'm not ready." And I lost it. Right there. I didn't think. I didn't process. I just broke. Because whatever confusion existed between us, whatever questions I had started to carry quietly in the background, none of it mattered in that moment. She was still Diane. My friend. The person I had built a decade of my life around. And she was dying. So I did what I always did. I showed up. Fully. Appointments. Treatments. Late-night calls when she couldn't sleep. Sitting beside her during chemo while she drifted in and out of nausea and exhaustion. My life started revolving around her schedule again without me even noticing it happening. And weirdly, I felt proud of that. Like this was proof of who I was. A loyal friend. A steady presence. Someone who doesn't leave when things get hard. There was one night I still think about too often. She called me at around 2 in the morning because she couldn't stop crying. I drove over without thinking. Still in pajamas. Hair unbrushed. Just instinct. And I sat on the floor beside her couch while she talked about dying. And at one point she looked at me and whispered, "You're the only person who's never left me." That sentence should have felt simple. Comforting. But instead it landed somewhere strange inside me. Like it was heavier than it should have been. I didn't understand why at the time. I just held her hand and stayed. Because that's what I always did. She died on a Thursday morning in October. I remember the weather because it felt wrong somehow that the world kept moving like nothing had changed. Rain on the windshield. Traffic outside the hospital. Someone laughing in the hallway. And I remember standing in my kitchen afterward just staring at nothing, thinking, how is everyone still living normally right now? For weeks after she died, I was barely functional. I kept reaching for my phone to text her before remembering I couldn't. I'd see something funny and instinctively think, I need to tell Diane this. And then it would hit me again. She wasn't there. That kind of grief is disorienting. It doesn't just hurt. It erases your automatic habits. But even in all that grief, I still didn't question her. Not really. Grief softened everything. It made her feel pure again in my memory. Almost untouchable. And that's how I carried her for 3 years. Until the storage unit. Until the notebook. Until the moment I sat on a concrete floor and opened something she had labeled, private. I remember my hands shaking before I even read a word. At first, it didn't feel dangerous. It felt intimate. She wrote about me like I was the most important person in her life outside her children. Page after page of affection. And I cried a little reading it because part of me was still grieving her. Still missing her. Still wanting her to be exactly who I believed she was. And for a moment, I thought maybe this was just grief in written form. Until I kept reading. And the tone started changing. Not suddenly. Gradually. Like a door slowly closing behind me without me realizing it. Because she wasn't just describing me. She was documenting me. And analyzing me. And using me. And the first time I saw my own life reflected back through her words in a way that didn't feel loving anymore. I had to put the notebook down because I couldn't breathe properly. And that was the moment I understood something I didn't want to understand. The story I had been living in for 11 years was not the same story she had been writing.